Please don't. That is forbidden. If you touch my stomach, if you feel what's there, you'll understand why I'm forbidden.
Please don't. That is forbidden, the giant bride whispered through tears as she collapsed in the ranch yard, her trembling hand pushing weakly against her husband's chest. Clara Ashford, the strongest woman Jeremiah Cole had ever seen, who could lift a full-grown steer and break fence posts with her bare hands, was now helpless in the dirt, burning with fever and begging him not to save her life. The rancher knelt beside his bride of 3 months, his heart shattering as this powerful woman who'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry him now looked at him with the eyes of someone preparing to lose everything. "If you touch my stomach," the giant bride gasped, her muscular frame shaking with sobs, "if you feel what's there, you'll understand why I'm forbidden, why I can never be a real wife to you, why the last town drove me out with guns and hatred." But the rancher understood something else in that moment. He understood that he loved this woman more than his own breath, and whatever secret she was hiding beneath his calloused palm would either destroy them both or shake the whole town of Redemption Creek into finally seeing the truth about love, acceptance, and what it means to be human. The Montana sun had climbed to its cruel peak when Clara's knees buckled. One moment she'd been carrying 2 water buckets from the well, each weighing 50 pounds and looking light as feathers in her grip, and the next she was stumbling, her face drained of color, one hand clutching at her belly like she'd been shot. Jeremiah had been fixing the corral fence when he heard the buckets hit the ground with a metallic clang that echoed across the empty prairie. He ran faster than he'd run since the war, his boots pounding the hard earth, dust rising behind him like smoke. By the time he reached her, she was on her hands and knees, gasping for air, her long, dark hair falling forward to hide her face. The sight of her like this woman who never showed weakness, who never complained, who carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone used to being judged. It tore something open inside him that he didn't know could still break. "Clara, sweetheart, I got you," Jeremiah said, his voice rough with fear as he dropped down beside her. He reached to support her, to lift her, but she jerked away from his touch like it burned. Her eyes when she looked up at him were wild, panicked, the eyes of a cornered animal. "Don't," she breathed. "Please, Jeremiah, don't touch me there. Don't, you can't." But her words dissolved into a moan of pain, and her body swayed dangerously. He could see the fever in her flushed cheeks, could see the way her powerful shoulders trembled with the effort of holding herself upright. This wasn't pride or stubbornness. This was terror. "Clara, you're sick. You need help." He kept his voice calm, the way he'd learned to do with frightened horses, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. "Let me carry you inside. Let me—" "Get Doc Morrison?" "No." The word came out sharp and desperate. Her hand shot out and gripped his wrist with that shocking strength she had, fingers like iron bands around his bones. For a second, he saw what the townspeople whispered about when they thought he couldn't hear. This woman wasn't natural, they said, wasn't right, wasn't safe. But all Jeremiah saw was the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach 3 months ago, with nothing but a worn carpet bag and a letter he'd written to a matchmaking service in St. Louis, the woman who'd said yes to marrying a stranger, because anywhere was better than where she'd been. "If a doctor examines me," Clara said, and her voice cracked on the words, "if anyone finds out what I am, they'll take me away, Jeremiah. They'll lock me in an asylum or they'll—" She couldn't finish. Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. The last town, when they discovered the truth, they came with torches. They called me a demon, an abomination. They said I was God's punishment on decent folk. The pain in her voice was worse than any physical wound he'd ever seen. This was the pain of a soul that had been broken too many times, that had learned to expect cruelty instead of kindness. Jeremiah felt something shift in his chest, something that had been locked tight since his first wife died giving birth to their stillborn son 15 years ago. He'd built walls around his heart after that, thick as castle stone, and told himself he'd never risk that kind of pain again. But Clara had somehow found a way through those walls without even trying. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at his ranch that first day, not with disappointment at its modest size, but with wonder, like she'd finally found a place she might belong. Maybe it was the way she hummed while cooking breakfast, old songs in a language he didn't recognize. Maybe it was the night 2 weeks after the wedding when she'd finally told him why she'd answered his advertisement, her voice barely a whisper in the darkness of their bedroom. "I needed someone who might see me as human, just once. That's all I wanted." "Tell me," Jeremiah said now, and he made his voice as gentle as he knew how. "Tell me what you're afraid of, Clara. Tell me what's forbidden." He released his wrist from her grip. She let him go immediately, always so careful not to hurt him with that strength. And slowly, carefully, he placed both his hands on either side of her face. Her skin was burning hot beneath his palms. Whatever it is, whatever you're hiding, I'm your husband. In sickness and health, remember? That's what we promised each other in front of Reverend Walsh, and I don't break my promises. Clara looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Hope fighting with fear, trust battling with a lifetime of rejection. Then she closed her eyes and took a shuddering breath. My stomach, she whispered. If you press on my stomach, you'll feel it. You'll feel what makes me forbidden, what makes me impossible. Her voice dropped even lower. I'm not built like other women, Jeremiah. Inside. Where it matters. Where wives are supposed to be able to... She couldn't say it, but he understood. The way she'd flinched away on their wedding night, the way she'd cried and apologized and expected him to be angry, the way she'd been so carefully grateful when he'd held her instead and said they had all the time in the world. His hand hovered over her abdomen, and he felt her entire body tense beneath his touch. Show me, he said quietly. Let me understand. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse, thought she'd push him away and run the way she must have run from that other town, from whatever hell she'd lived through before finding him. But then she nodded, just once, and guided his hand to rest flat against her belly, just below her ribs. And the moment his palm made contact, he felt it, felt what no woman should have, what no doctor in 1876 would have understood or forgiven. Beneath the thin cotton of her dress, beneath the burning heat of her fever-ravaged skin, Jeremiah felt the unmistakable hardness of old scar tissue, thick, ropey ridges that crisscrossed her abdomen like a map of violence. But it wasn't just scars. As he pressed gently, carefully, he felt something else, something that made his breath catch in his throat. Her internal structure was wrong, not diseased, not damaged by illness, but fundamentally, impossibly different. Where there should have been the soft give of a woman's body, there was only hardness, density. Like her entire core was made of something closer to packed muscle and gristle than the delicate architecture that allowed women to carry children. He understood in that moment why she'd whispered those words on their wedding night. I can never give you sons, Jeremiah. I can never be what a wife should be. Good God, he breathed, but not with horror, with understanding, with sudden terrible clarity about what her life must have been. Clara's eyes snapped open and she tried to pull away, tried to escape his touch, but he held her there gently, his other hand still cupping her fevered face. No, wait, he said quickly. Clara, wait, listen to me. But she was already sobbing, the words tumbling out of her in a rush like water breaking through a dam. I was born wrong. The midwife told my mother I should have died, said I was a mistake of nature. My insides never formed right. No womb, no way to ever... And then I kept growing, kept getting stronger. By the time I was 12, I was taller than my father and could outwork any man in our county. They called me cursed, called me the devil's daughter. Jeremiah's jaw tightened as he imagined her as a child, a little girl who'd done nothing wrong except exist, being told she was a monster. Who did this? He asked, his fingers tracing the scars through her dress. Who cut you? Clara's face crumpled. A doctor in Omaha, when I was 16. My parents paid him everything they had, begged him to fix me, to make me normal so maybe someone would marry me and take me off their hands. He said he could reconstruct things, make me able to bear children. But something went wrong during the surgery. The pain was... She shuddered violently at the memory. When I woke up, he told my parents it was hopeless, said my body had rejected the procedure, said I'd developed an infection that had scarred everything beyond repair, said I was barren as a mule and twice as unnatural. The rancher felt rage building in his chest, hot and righteous. Not at Clara. Never at Clara. But at every person who'd looked at this woman and seen something to fix instead of someone to love. At doctors who'd treated her like a failed experiment. At parents who'd been ashamed of their own daughter. At towns full of good Christian folk who'd driven her out with torches because she didn't fit into their narrow little boxes of what a woman should be. And the last town? He asked quietly. What happened there? Clara's voice went hollow, distant, like she was recounting someone else's nightmare. I'd been working as a ranch hand, pretending to be a man, wearing my hair short, binding my chest, keeping my head down. It worked for almost 2 years, but then the rancher's wife got sick, real sick, and she needed a woman's care. They asked me to help, to tend to her privately, And when I refused, when I made excuses, they got suspicious. She closed her eyes against the memory. The rancher forced me into the barn, tore open my shirt to prove I was lying about being a man. When he realized what I was, he started screaming, calling everyone. By nightfall, the whole town knew there was a woman who'd been deceiving them, living among them, working alongside their men. They said I was trying to steal men's jobs, trying to corrupt their sons. The preacher said I was a sign of the end times, a woman in man's clothing, barren and unnatural, strong as Samson, but twisted by Satan. Her voice broke. They gave me 1 hour to leave before they burned me out. I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back. Walked for 3 days before I reached the next town. That's where I saw your advertisement. Seeking a bride, no questions about the past. Jeremiah pulled her against his chest then, carefully, and felt her massive frame shake with sobs. She was so strong, strong enough to break him if she wanted. But in this moment, she felt fragile as glass. I thought maybe, she whispered into his shirt, maybe if I came here as a mail-order bride, if I was honest about not being able to have children in my letter to you, you might accept me anyway. Might let me just exist. Be a wife in whatever way I could. Cook your meals, mend your clothes, help with the ranch work, anything. I just wanted to stop running. She looked up at him with eyes full of desperate hope and bone-deep fear. But I never told you about the scars, about what's really wrong with me. I was afraid if you knew how deep the wrongness went, you'd send me away too. The fever was getting worse. Jeremiah could feel it radiating off her skin, could see the way her eyes were starting to lose focus. Whatever infection or illness had taken hold, it was serious, life-threatening serious. And if he didn't get her help soon, he might lose her. But if he brought Doc Morrison out here, the old doctor would examine her, would discover her secret, and Redemption Creek would become just another town that drove Clara Ashford away. Or worse. Small towns had long memories and short tempers when it came to anyone different, anyone who challenged their understanding of how the world should work. Here's what's going to happen, Jeremiah said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. I'm going to carry you into the house. I'm going to put you in our bed, and I'm going to take care of you myself. No doctor, no one else needs to know about this. Clara's eyes widened. But you don't know how to treat a fever this bad. Jeremiah, you could watch me die. You could... Then I'll figure it out, he interrupted. But I'll be damned if I let those hypocrites in town get their hands on you. You're my wife, Clara. Mine. And I protect what's mine. He lifted her then. And God, she was heavy, solid muscle and dense bone, not the delicate weight of the women he'd known before. But he managed it, cradling her against his chest as he carried her across the dusty yard toward their small ranch house. She buried her face in his neck, and he felt wetness there, tears she'd probably been holding back for years. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Someone who can never give you children, who can never be a normal wife? Jeremiah kicked open the door to their bedroom and laid her gently on the quilt his mother had made 40 years ago. He looked down at this woman, this impossible, wonderful, forbidden woman, and felt something unlock in his chest that he'd thought was dead forever. Because I don't want normal, he said simply. I want you. He brushed the sweat-soaked hair back from her forehead. And because 3 months ago, a woman with more courage than anyone I've ever met stepped off a stagecoach and agreed to build a life with a broken-down rancher with more past than future. She worked harder than any 3 men. She never complained. She laughed at my terrible jokes. She made this empty house feel like a home again. And every night, she lay beside me in the dark and made me remember what it felt like to not be alone. His voice roughened. So no, Clara, you don't get to decide you're not worth saving. I already decided you are. For a moment she just stared at him, and he saw something shift in her eyes, some small, fragile thing that might have been hope, might have been the beginning of trust. Then the fever surged again and she cried out, her body arching off the bed, her hand clutching at her abdomen where the old scars pulled and burned. It hurts, she gasped. God, Jeremiah, something's wrong. The scars, they feel like they're tearing open inside. And Jeremiah realized with cold, creeping horror that whatever was happening to her, whatever infection or complication was ravaging her body, it was centered exactly where that butcher of a doctor had cut her open 10 years ago. The surgery that was supposed to make her normal had left something behind, something that was now trying to kill her. He ran to the kitchen, his mind racing through everything he knew about treating injuries from his war days. Whiskey to clean wounds, hot water and clean cloth, willow bark tea for fever. But this was different. This was internal. This was something he couldn't see or reach or fix with his hands. He grabbed supplies anyway, refusing to let panic take over, and when he returned to the bedroom, Clara was curled on her side, her powerful body trembling violently. "I'm sorry," she kept whispering. "I'm so sorry, Jeremiah. You shouldn't have to see this, shouldn't have to—" "Stop apologizing," he said firmly, setting down the basin of hot water. "You've spent your whole life apologizing for existing, Clara. I won't hear another word of it." He helped her sit up, helped her drink some of the willow bark tea, even though her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the cup. Then he did something he'd never done before in his 43 years of life. He prayed. Not the formal prayers from church, not the empty words people said because they were expected to, but a real prayer, raw and desperate and honest. "Please," he thought, his hand pressed against Clara's burning forehead. "Please don't take her from me. I just found her. I just started learning how to be alive again. Please." The night stretched out long and dark. The fever climbed higher. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying out in pain, sometimes whispering things in that other language he didn't understand. And Jeremiah stayed beside her, bathing her face with cool water, holding her when the shaking got too bad, refusing to let her slip away into whatever darkness was trying to claim her. Just before dawn, when the fever finally broke and Clara fell into an exhausted sleep, Jeremiah heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. He moved to the window and felt his stomach drop. Half the town was riding up his dusty road, Mayor Hutchins leading the pack with Reverend Walsh, Doc Morrison, and at least a dozen other men trailing behind. They'd come armed. Rifles glinted in the early morning light. Someone had talked. Someone had seen Clara collapse yesterday, had noticed the doctor never came, had started asking questions that small towns always asked when something didn't fit their neat little picture of how things should be. Jeremiah stepped out onto his porch, pulling the door shut behind him, placing his body between these men and his sleeping wife. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, though his hand rested near the revolver on his hip. "Little early for a social call." Mayor Hutchins dismounted, his fat face red even in the cool morning air. "We heard your wife took ill yesterday, Cole. Real ill. Heard you refused to call for Doc Morrison." The mayor's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Now, why would a man let his wife suffer without medical attention unless he was hiding something? "My wife's privacy is her own business," Jeremiah replied evenly. "And mine, not yours." But Doc Morrison pushed forward, his medical bag in hand. "Son, if she's got something contagious, something that could spread to other families in this town, we have a right to know. We have a responsibility to protect—" "She's not contagious," Jeremiah interrupted. "She had a fever. It broke. She's sleeping. Now I'll thank you all to get off my property." Reverend Walsh stepped forward then, his Bible clutched in his bony hands, his face twisted with that particular kind of righteousness that had always made Jeremiah's skin crawl. "We've been hearing stories, Brother Cole, stories about your bride, about her unusual nature, her size, her strength. There are those who say she's not natural, not right in God's eyes." The Reverend's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. "There are those who say she might be possessed by demons." Jeremiah felt rage flood through him like wildfire. "You want to talk about what's natural, Reverend? About what's right in God's eyes?" His voice was deadly quiet. "My wife works harder than any man in this town. She's kinder than any of your gossiping church ladies. She doesn't cheat at cards like you, Mayor. She doesn't water down her whiskey and sell it for full price like you, Morrison. And she sure as hell doesn't stand in a pulpit on Sunday preaching love while spending Monday through Saturday spreading hate." The men shifted uncomfortably, but Reverend Walsh's eyes blazed with zealous fury. "The Bible is clear about abominations, about those who defy God's natural order." "Then you better start reading your own Bible more carefully," a voice rang out from behind Jeremiah. Clara stood in the doorway, still pale and weak, but standing tall, her 6'3" frame towering even in her nightdress. "Because the same Jesus you claim to follow spent his time with outcasts, with the broken, with everyone your type called unnatural and unclean." She walked forward slowly, deliberately, until she stood beside her husband. "You want to know what makes me different? What makes me forbidden?" Her voice carried across the silent yard. "I was born without a womb. I can never bear children. A doctor tried to fix me when I was 16 and left me scarred inside and out. I'm stronger than most men because my body built muscle where it should have built other things. That's my secret. That's what you rode out here with your guns to discover." The men stared, some with shock, some with disgust, some with something that might have been pity. Clara lifted her chin higher. The last town called me a demon and drove me out with torches. So go ahead, get your fire. Prove that Redemption Creek is just as small and cruel as every other place I've run from. Or, her voice softened, and Jeremiah heard the pain underneath. Or you could let me live in peace. Let me be a wife to a good man who sees me as human. Let me work my land and harm no one and just exist. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Doc Morrison cleared his throat awkwardly. That fever of yours, it was likely an infection from the old surgical scars. Internal inflammation. You'll need to be careful, Mrs. Cole. Watch for signs of it recurring. He met her eyes with something like respect. But you're right. It's not contagious, not dangerous to anyone but yourself. He turned to his horse. I got actual sick people to tend to. Good day. One by one, the men mounted their horses and rode away. Some looked ashamed, some still looked suspicious, but they left, all except Mayor Hutchins, who paused before leaving. This town has its problems, Cole, but we're not monsters. We'll leave you be. He glanced at Clara. Though I'll warn you, there will be talk. There always is. Let them talk, Jeremiah said, pulling Clara against his side. We've got nothing to hide anymore. As the dust settled from the departing horses, Clara turned to her husband with tears streaming down her face. You could have let them take me. Could have saved yourself the scandal. Why didn't you? Jeremiah cupped her face in his weathered hands. Because love isn't about perfect. It's not about normal. It's about finding someone who makes your broken pieces fit together into something beautiful. You did that for me, Clara. You made me want to live again. He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. And I don't care what's forbidden or what's impossible. You're my wife, my partner, my home. And nothing, not this town, not their judgment, not anything, will ever change that. Clara wrapped her powerful arms around him and buried her face in his neck, and for the first time in her 30 years of life, she felt something she'd never felt before. Safe, accepted, loved exactly as she was. The sun rose higher over the Montana prairie, painting the sky gold and pink, and somewhere in Redemption Creek, people were already whispering about the giant bride and her rancher. But on that dusty ranch, two broken souls had found each other and decided that forbidden love was the only kind worth having. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is look at what the world calls impossible and whisper back, "Watch me." So where are you watching this story from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful tale of love, courage, and breaking the rules that try to keep us small. See you in the next story.